And hello and welcome everyone. Follow me, you mentioned more than I deserved, but yeah, I really appreciate that. I would share my screen and all right, I think I'm audible, right? Follow me, I'm just checking with you. Am I audible, loud and clear? And my screen is visible.
Absolutely. You are spot on.
Awesome. Thanks a lot. It can't be better than this, speaking in a conference organized by our neighboring country. And I really appreciate the fact that I am speaking for a conference from a land of Ustad Nusrat Ali Khan Sahab. Peace be upon him. My name is Anand Pandey, and I'm also a director of Agile in Fidelity Investment. That's my day job. Apart from that, I'm a newly brewed professional Scrum trainer and a management consultant. And today, yes, I'm going to talk about a very controversial topic, designing anti-fragile system to make your organization more agile. And there's really no way for me to predict or control how this session will be going. How will you be taking this session altogether? And to add to that complexity, let me make a controversial statement. Whatever you're doing right now is making your team more fragile than agile. Yes, it's making your team more fragile than agile. And for the next 30 minutes, I'm just trying to explain you what does this mean and how can we come out of that. But before that, let's get into some of these terms. What does these mean? Starting with fragile. A fragile item is like anything that breaks under stress. Take off a glass falling off a table. It just breaks apart. On the other hand, you would be having something like a resilient item. A resilient item is something which has the ability to recover from the failure. Something that, even if it disrupts, it gets back to its original state. And then we have got something like a robust item, which has the ability to resist the failure. It resists the shock itself. It's not about bouncing back. It just stays the same. For us to help us differentiate between resilient and robust item, think boxing. Robustness is how much can we take before we fall down. And resilience is how long will it take us to stand up back again. But there's something missing in between, right? Between fragile, resilient, and robust. And that is where our anti-fragile comes into picture. Anti-fragile is something that has ability to get better. Each time you make a disruption, it comes back even stronger so that it can avoid such disruptions in the future. In fact, this term itself was coined by the famous economist called Nicholas Nassim Taleb. I'm just showing the book. I'm not sure you can see that. Anti-fragile. This term itself was coined from there. But if you look at our life itself, isn't our life also anti-fragile? Isn't life all about finding ways to gain from these inevitable disorder that life brings to ourselves? Don't we just bounce back whenever things do not go as per our plan? Don't we get stronger, smarter, better, and we continue to show ourselves even better? The more disorder life brings to us, the more stronger we come back. Even our body, we do those weight resistant exercises, right? What actually happens is that it causes those micro fractures in our bones. It does those micro tears in our muscles. And each time we go back to the sleep, it self-heals. So next day, our muscles are more stronger, our bones are more stronger. It's more resistant. It does not mean that we can go to the extreme end. Of course, if we go more than our weight capacity, it will cause us more fractures. Whereas if we go on to the extreme end of taking, like just go to the gym and pick up a 5-pound dumbbell, that will be just a useless. We'll have to find that right balance between being completely fragile and being completely robust. And that's where the sweet spot of anti-fragile lies into. Okay, so I mentioned about this book, which first line came, and the book itself has got the first line, wind extinguishes a candle and energizes fire. So what it means is that candle is more fragile to the wind, while fire is more anti-fragile to the wind. It's the same wind, right? It's the same wind for the candle. It's the same wind for the fire. But the candle, sorry, just move to the next slide, previous slide. but it is the candle which loses to this wind, whereas it's the fire which just gains from this wind. So let's take small quiz for us to help understand the difference between fragile, robust, and anti-fragile. And we are here, I've got three different cartoon characters, Mr. Glass, Superman, and Hulk. Now you may put it onto the chat window, the character name and its appropriate category. Like whether you think Superman is fragile, robust, or anti-fragile, and for the other characters as well. I invite others to put your thoughts onto the chat window. So I see Faiza Fahim as, yeah, fragile as Mr. Glass. What about others? Superman resilient, Hulk robust, fragile Mr. Glass. Fragile is Superman. All right, different thoughts coming up. So we all agree that Mr. Glass is fragile. And Superman is robust. You shoot a bullet also, it doesn't impact. Whereas Hulk takes the power and energy. The more angry he gets, the more anti-fragile becomes. The more you cause a damage, the more stronger and bulkier he becomes. That's why he's Hulk. Yes, Superman is resilient. But for those people who do not follow cartoon, there's a different way we can think of. Right, coming out of the cartoon characters, we can see it in our IT systems as well. On the extreme end, we have got the fragile IT systems, which just breaks whenever there is a single production issue, or we see a simple security breach. On the other hand, we see robust IT systems. You have invested huge amount of money in building that high level of availability, implementing redundancy and replication strategies. But then there is, I'll mention what this chaos monkey is. For people who know about it, they may just wait for it. We built that anti-fragile IT systems which ensures that these minor or major changes which happens, major outages that happens, do not get replicated. They build that well-measured countermeasures. And they seek out ways to strategically disrupt the system. They do not wait for the system to be disrupted from outside. They are in fact waiting. Yep, so Ali just now mentioned that yes, anti-fragile IT support system can be built. You do not wait for someone from outside to disrupt. In fact, you build that disruption by yourself. And let's take the example of Netflix. Their engineering team intentionally created a cool tool called Chaos Monkey. And this software will be randomly terminating the services of the infrastructure. Just imagine, production system. In the production system, this service will go and just shut down their infrastructure. And each time the production server is down, their engineering services will jump up and redesign their architecture so that it does not get impacted next time. They're trying to build that self-healing capability. They're trying to build that anti-fragility in their infrastructure. So when it did happen, when Amazon Web Services had a major disruption in April 2011, Netflix was the least impacted. In fact, 2 months back or 1 month back also, Amazon Web Services had a big impact. And Netflix, because of their anti-fragility, and by the way, they have upgraded themselves from Chaos Monkey to Chaos Gorilla now. And now they have built that anti-fragility. Yes, a proactive approach for anti-fragility. Wonderful point, Faiza. But what are we preparing for? We may not be affected by Amazon Web Services, but what are we preparing for? We are preparing ourselves from the Black Swan events. These Black Swan events are extremely rare events, which has got widespread consequences, which we cannot anticipate. We put it something like a turkey effect, right? The turkey throughout the year thinks that, hey, the butcher is his or her best friend. Statistically, for 364 days, the turkey is being very well fed. The butcher will be never hurting. But until on a Thanksgiving day, the butcher comes and slaughters it out. But yes, this Black Swan event is for the turkey. The butcher was always preparing to slaughter the turkey on the Thanksgiving day. We are surrounded by these Black Swan events. In the last couple of decades itself, we have seen 2001 dot-com bubbles. We have seen financial crises in 2008, 9/11 attacks, and even right now, we have this COVID-19. It's a very big black swan event. It has affected everything. It has affected every way we were seeing our life. It has created disruption across boundaries, across territories. Millions of life has gone, and it has just disrupted how our organization work, how our productivity, how our way of living has completely changed. And we are continuing to adapt. Even now, we are almost on the verge of a third wave in the subcontinent, and we are on to the verge of it. But it's not about how are we dealing with it now. It's about when we are out of this pandemic. How are we going to adapt ourselves? How are we going to learn from this black swan event? How are we going to adapt ourselves from these seismic shifts? How are we going to build that anti-fragility within our organizational way of working, our business model? So how are we going to give this small shocks in our organization so that the big shock, when it comes, we are anti-fragile? But then the next question comes up is, what is stopping us? And the biggest thing that is stopping us from building the organizational anti-fragility is standardization. Trust me, believe me or not, it's the standardization which is we are so much obsessed with. Trying to bring predictability in our life also, right? We plan so much in our life. We plan right from our retirements to our kids' schools and marriage and everything. But doesn't life give us shocks, just throws random surprises to us? So in order to control everything, we must try to see how can we gain from these disorders. Understanding that standardization is actually the biggest blocker, we need to see how is this standardization coming in our organization. Why is the team constrained from their ability to develop local solution? Why are we always seeing that we'll have to think from a short-term solution? Why do we want to build the whole organization following a standard process, whether it is an ITIL, CMMI5, but for that matter, even Agile? Why do we have to standardize the whole Agile transformation across the organization? Why do we have to have a standardized maturity assessment across the organization? The more you're trying to standardize, the more you are creating a fragile system. Because you have no other fallback option. You have only one way of working. So if that one way of working does not work in this new way of world, like the new black swan event, you do not have any fallback option. But you will see that, yes, this anti-pattern is very much prevalent. Teams are not allowed to do experimentation. Teams cannot come up with a new tool. In fact, if you're using any of the ALM tool, in Indian subcontinent, we predominantly use Jira as an Agile tool, right? And every team has to follow that standard tool, the standard workflow, the standard fields, everything so standardized that team cannot think outside of it. They'll have to take n number of approvals even to change any workflow. There are so many bureaucratic processes which were written on the Stone Age, but we still have to follow because we are not supposed to question. We are not supposed to question, hey, why is it a problem when the team makes these choices? Every team is different, right? Their work, their environment, their engagement, even their solution is different. If that's the case, and if each team is effective, how does it make a difference that they are trying a different way to work on it? And for that matter, let's even think, where is this crave for standardization coming into picture? Why do we always look for standardization? Any guess? Let's check into the chat window. Why do you think your organization looks for standardization? Anyone would like to put their thoughts? Audit purposes, all right. Predictive. Best practices, because of quality work. It makes it very much simple, but not simpler, because we might just be assuming that it makes it simple. Wow, Zaid, I like that answer. They are basically doing that, even though they do not admit, they're just trying to save themselves. Who would like to get onto that discussion? Hey, if this broke, why did you give them this opportunity? The management do not want them to be disturbed. That is why they built that culture of stable and standard way of working, so that you do not question them. Who would like to take an extra pain of disruption? But it's not the standardization, but the variability in the solution, variability in the way you are practicing, you're structuring the organization, which will make you more anti-fragile. So between the two black swan events, it's all good, right? And management are basking in the sun, getting the hefty salary and going home. But when these black swan event happen, the organization which has built that anti-fragility really makes a disruption. Let me give you a wonderful example. Shane Warne, he was a famous cricketer from Australia, right? He has a wine distillery in South Australia. The moment this pandemic was there, he very well knew that, okay, no more shops open, no more alcohol could be sold. But he already had that anti-fragility built within his organization. We know ethanol is used to make consumable alcohol, and that same ethanol is used to make hand sanitizer. He just overnight repurposed his entire organization, his entire factory and distillery itself, to produce hand sanitizer. And he made millions out of that. He did not wait for that black swan event and then react. He very well responded to that black swan event. But to build that competency, there's a lot invested. So we'll have to see that how can we build that organizational culture where we are building this double loop learning, where we are building that culture where we build redundancy is fine, because most of the time leaders say that, hey, why should we reinvent the wheel? Isn't it redundant that different teams working on same organization following different practices? Yes, those efficiency-seeking managers, those cost-based, accountancy-based managers, they always make statements like, hey, it will be a mess if different teams start working differently. It's just an inefficient way to reinvent the wheel multiple times. It will be just a chaos. So they always think that, hey, can't we have a standardized single solution for the same problem? On a normal day, yes. Even Nassim Taleb says that redundancy is really a waste. But if nothing unusual happens, except that something unusual happens usually. Yes, unusual things happens very usually. In fact, every 3 years, you see that some kind of a black swan event is happening. So building this redundancy for our competitive advantage is very much essential. And now coming to the point of how do we build this organizational redundancy? It's by 3 things: building nonlinearity, optionality, and transferring. And we look at each of these, starting with antifragility through nonlinearity. It's not just about spending time on single loop, but also double loop learning. Single loop learning is I did something and I see that it's not working, I improve onto it. Double loop learning is about learning or questioning, why am I doing this in the first place? There is nothing more useless than doing something more efficiently, which should have not been done on the first place itself. So adopt that dual learning, double loop learning. Try out various solutions. In fact, when I was working for McKinsey, we used design thinking. People use design thinking for the customer journey map, right? We use design thinking. We considered employees as our customers. And like our customers, external customers, even our internal customers are going through their customer journey map, right from their sprint planning to the sprint retrospective. If you consider that as the journey and apply design thinking, you could be able to come up with very customized solution for your different Scrum teams. And that's what I coach the Scrum Masters: apply design thinking to enhance the employee engagement. And for different teams, we were able to come up with a different process and practices which they themselves suggested. We did not standardize. In fact, we built that non-linearity. We taught the Scrum Masters of how to fish rather than fishing it on behalf of them. We did not teach them best practices. We coached them on using the tool to find out the appropriate or emergent practices coming from the team themselves. But I'm not saying that, no, you'll have to come up with such, you do not have to standardize. You may still want to build kind of a learning from each other, but not an expense of variability. You may still want to have that community of practices. Life is too short. You cannot learn or experience everything firsthand. You may want to learn from vicarious experience of people, from their failed experiments. You may want to learn onto that and build on top of that. And that is where your non-linearity makes a very important aspect. So yes, to build non-linearity, I invite you to coach your Scrum Master. And if you're yourself Scrum Master, have a discussion with the team, come up with a very specific practices which work for your team. And you may want to extend human-centered approach of design thinking to come up with an environment, a workplace, which is more human-centered rather than just purely thinking from standardized organizational practice. The next is about antifragility through optionality. Optionality is about cultivating a barbell strategy. There are two ends of the barbell, right? At one end, there's a very much reliable, safe, and predictable way of doing that every day-to-day job. On the other hand, you take lots of small bets. You try experiments, small processes. So in the first one, where I mentioned that you come up with a very customized processes, here we are talking about those customized processes. Try small things and see if it works or not. The more you get success, the more you get that habit, that Netflix one which I was talking about, the more anti-fragile you are being. You build that culture of experimentation. We always say that engineers are not experimenting, our developers are not experimenting. Start with allowing them to experiment with their own processes before the product. In fact, do not wait. Do not say that because my whole product is working fine. Yes, starting with small steps can build confidence. They'll feel safe. It's like those trapeze, right? They first practice in a net. And only when they have built that sufficient confidence, then in the real circus, they remove that net because they have built trust among each other. Now they can do that without even looking at whether there is a net below or not. And do not just assume that if everything is working fine, it will continue working fine other time also. Let's go with the simple stuff, your daily scrum or daily stand-up, whatever you're calling. Just because your daily stand-up or daily scrum is working fine the way you are doing right now does not mean you will not try a different way. Or just because your sprint retrospective is working fine, you will not try a different way. Keep exploring, keep disrupting. In fact, if you feel that your team are not speaking up in your agile sprint retrospective, it is because you have not disrupted them. Try a new way of sprint retrospective. Tomorrow, if God forbid that you will have to not do, assuming that you are doing your daily stand-up or a daily scrum at 9 o'clock in the morning. Tomorrow, if your organization shifts to a 12 o'clock time, your developers' time is all around that 9 o'clock. Suddenly, if you ask them to do it at 12 o'clock, they may not be able to. Not everybody will be able to. But if you practice it, this week we'll be doing our daily stand-up or daily scrum at 9 o'clock. Next week, let's try it out 12 o'clock. See what happens. Whether participation increases, energy increases, you never know. I'm just giving you a small hint. There are lots of other areas we can have a detailed discussion around it on how you can disrupt, how you can just change the way. Try out MVPs, minimum viable processes. We talk about minimum viable products. Try out minimum viable processes within your teams and see how your team responds to it. And finally, coming to antifragility through transferring. You want to have a complete decentralized. Yes, Ali is mentioning, yes, barbell strategy is basically, actually, Nassim Taleb is an investment strategist. He talks from the economic perspective. What we have borrowed it onto Agile as well. Yes, Ali. Yes, it's actually coming from investment mindset. And finally, coming to transferring fragility by decentralizing the decision making. I'll just check with people. I'm curious, Paulumi, how much time do I still have? 5 minutes? Okay, I'll be just very quick. How many brains do our human body have? Anyone? Any guess? Wow, Paulumi, you mentioned it very right. And what are those? Any?
Lower, middle brain, and
Oh, that is within the skull. I didn't even ask that. In the entire body. So by the way, I have limited time. Let me answer that. We have got 3 brains in our body. One is inside the skull, another is inside the heart, and third in the gut. That's why we say, right, gut feeling, go by your heart and listen to your brain. So we have got 3 brains. And yes, within the skull itself, there are 3 brains. The reptilian complex, the limbic system, and the neocortex. So what Paulumi was mentioning was within the skull, but in our body also. So our body itself is highly decentralized. Why can't we decentralize our organization? Let the self-managing teams self-organize around the problem. Build a culture of risk-taking and not just risk management. In fact, I am a very strong opponent of Agile maturity model, which is standardized across the organization. You may want to ask your team what do you define, or even an individual, if you're doing an individual coaching to the Scrum Master coaching of the team, how do they define a perfect team or a perfect Scrum Master? That's onto the extreme right side. On the extreme left side, what do they think they are? And before that, you would have agreed on the different dimensions like emotional intelligence, influencing skills, and blah, blah, blah stuff, facilitation, right? And then you ask them, okay, from point A where you are right now to point B, how are you planning to move? And this is a very customized journey plan for each individual, each coach, each team. Do not standardize that, because everyone in life also, same is the case in our workplace, we are all traveling our own journey. And concluding, the key takeaway is anti-fragility built over time. It does not just happen over time. And the right time to start becoming anti-fragile is now. And when the enough teams in an organization start doing this, the whole system will start becoming anti-fragile. Not standardization, but variability in solutions, functions, and the way of working will make your organization more anti-fragile. And finally, taking together, the organizations start developing those skills, technologies, and then they'll not just be surviving the anti-fragility, but they'll actually be thriving on this disruption. And because they have now been able to adapt faster than the others. That was a few thoughts I thought of sharing about anti-fragility. Over to you, Paul.
Thank you so much, Anand. And it was such a wonderful session. I was mesmerized. Normally I speak a lot, you know that. But I was really thrilled to hear about what you had to say. And the floor is now open for questions. If anyone has any questions. Okay, we have Faiza Fahim. If you want to ask your questions, please go ahead.
Assalamualaikum everyone, and I'm really honored to be part of this Agile Regional Marathon. I have a question that what do you think, what's the impact of organizational culture on adoption of that Agile methodology? Like if we talk about the hierarchical structure, I think the adoption of Agile is really difficult for the people, and we need to convince the management of having strong approvals that Agile methodology is good. But in collaborative culture, I think that adoption is easy. So what are the steps that we can take in a hierarchical structure for the adoption of Agile methodology?
Thanks, Faiza, for a wonderful question about hierarchical and organizational agility. First of all, Agile does not talk. Agile is all about those 12 principles and the 4 values. And the first value itself is individuals and interactions over processes and tools. So if your hierarchical processes is inhibiting individuals and interactions, that is something which you may want to discuss. But if your hierarchy is not disrupting individuals and interactions, so be it. Now, coming to your second part of the question, where you said, how can we convince the management and the organizational hierarchy to help adopt agility? Is that the question which you were asking for?
Exactly.
The first and the foremost is bring the sense of urgency. Why should I go agile? What am I losing right now? It's more than what am I gaining? What am I losing? If I don't do agile, is it causing me lose time to market, lose market share, lose my employees, lose my customers? What am I losing right now, which my competitors are gaining? And once you have built that sense of urgency, then you may want to advocate by small experiments. See, this particular team had actually done level of agility and see their time to market compared to some other team, if you may want to compare, or just compare the same team previously and now. See their productivity, whatever is your sense of urgency. If your organization's sense of urgency is not time to market, you may not want to show that, see, this team has now been able to deliver it faster. If the sense of urgency is about quality, see, their team's quality has improved. Should we not invest more? Does that help you? Or
Thank you so much, Anand. Thank you.
wonderful.
I think we have time for one last question. Fahad, if you can go ahead. And if your questions have been answered, it would be great if you could lower your hands. Fahad, please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Anand, for a wonderful talk. So my question is that how can we distinguish or segregate where to apply agility and where to apply the anti-fragility approach that you just mentioned to us in this session?
All right, Fahad. So let me begin with the point that agility and anti-fragility are not XOR. You need to build anti-fragility to have agility.